We're here today to discuss a few of the questions that you guys sent in and to talk about what makes a really standout submission. My name is Phoebe Morgan. I'm the editorial director on the crime team, and I'm going to be part of the judging panel. And we also have Catherine.
Hi, I'm Catherine Cheshire. I'm the commissioning editor on the crime and thriller team, and I'm so excited to read everyone's entries.
And I'm Sophie Churcher, and I'm the assistant editor on the crime and thriller team.
Great. Thank you, guys. So I thought we would kick off with the first question that someone sent in, which is, what attracts you most in a submission? Is it strong writing with an average idea or average writing with a strong idea?
I mean, in an ideal world, obviously it's going to be both. I think the thing to say is that as editors, when we're going through a big inbox, then the thing that's going to stand out to us initially is going to be a really strong pitch. So, you know, nailing your title and a really short, snappy blurb, making it really eye-catching and exciting for us is just naturally going to make it leap out to us. But at the same time, if we start reading it and the voice isn't there, then, you know, it's ultimately not going to work for us in the long run. So in terms of you know, long-term career, then author voice is always going to be the absolute most important thing that we're looking for.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that it's important to say that just because the voice doesn't work for us doesn't mean it might not work for another editor. The voice can be quite subjective, but a really good idea will usually stand out from the crowd. So if you've got a killer idea, I would focus on that first and try and make your voice as authentic as it can be.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think when you're first reading a submission, that hook will be the thing that brings you in and starts you reading. So the writing has to be there, but I think the hook is key. Like that first idea that really sparks our interest is really important.
I was just thinking maybe we should give some ideas of really strong hooks that we have seen to help people understand what a hook is. So I always think The Silent Patient is a really good example of that, which is about a woman who shoots her husband in the head and then never speaks again. And I think that's a really interesting way into a crime novel, and that hook always stands out for me. Do you guys have any that you think are good examples?
I think for me at the moment, I'm all about escapism. So when I was looking for my next crime read, I went instantly to Ruth Ware's One by One and our very own Catherine Cooper, The Chalet. So I'm kind of looking for something that's, you know, set in an unusual place that really hooks me in and just takes me somewhere outside of the four walls of my flat that I've been staring at for the past year.
Yeah, I think that I completely agree. Like if you've got a bit of escapism, I think that can really work in crime as well, like that really strong sense of place. But I would also say we're quite lucky in that you can use an idea. So for example, Woman in the Window is a really good example of that, because it's what if this happened, like, and it's quite a normal thing normally. So a woman sees something happen through a window and then what happens next, and that can be really a really good technique to use in crime writing, kind of what if scenario.
Yeah, it can be a really good starting point, can't it? Great. And the second question is, what are your thoughts on merging crime with other genres? So if you've got a crime novel but it has a time travel element, or it maybe has another kind of genre mixed in with it, what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I mean, why not? I think if your idea is good, then I think we're open to sort of different elements in it. I guess crime would be the strongest one though, for us.
Yeah, I completely agree that I like things that are a little bit different. So, you know, anything that's sort of crime mixed with historical, or crime that's mixed with women's fiction, or, you know, crime that's kind of a bit more literary. I think as long as it's got a central hook of crime or mystery at its heart, then we're definitely open to seeing different ideas and variations on themes outside of that.
Yeah, I would say the same. I think we already have a couple of authors that do a bit of crossover. So we just published one called Sleep Tight, which is crime with a bit of supernatural in. We also published quite a lot of historical, people like Charles Cumming, which is kind of espionage plus crime. So as long as you have that darkness, I think it's fine for things to be mixed up a little bit. So if that's you, then we would love to see it. The next question is, do you consider literary crime as well?
Yeah, I think we're all open to seeing both commercial and literary types of crime writing. I guess the thing for us to say is that we're always looking for the most opportunities. So we want a book that's going to work potentially in bookshops and supermarkets and everything. So it's got to potentially have quite a broad appeal. I guess if you're trying for something really experimental or unusual, then perhaps the literary imprint itself might be more suited to you. But if it's just touching on literary themes or just doing something a little bit different, then absolutely, I think we're open to seeing it.
Yeah, I think that's our specialism, is commercial fiction, and we do have some literary titles, but I think if you're really literary and you would like an editor that's really literary, then there are other imprints and publishers that do that more than we do.
Yeah, I would say within HarperCollins there's the Borough Press and there's Fourth Estate, and they publish a lot of much more literary authors. But then we publish books which are a bit literary, commercial crossover. So we just published Girl A by Abigail Dean, which I would say hits that sweet spot. And I'm sure there's loads more on our list as well. So it kind of depends how literary your book is. But if you're on the fence, then you feel free to send it in and we can make a call when we read it. Another good question, I think this is a really interesting one, is it important for authors to be on social media to promote their books? I know a lot of authors have different feelings about this. I guess I personally think that if you like social media and you're happy using it, then great. Like we're never going to say no to a bit of self-promotion, because every promotion helps our marketing team and our own promotion. But if it's something that you find really difficult or doesn't come naturally to you, it's definitely not a deal breaker for me personally. What do you guys reckon?
Yeah, I think I agree, and I would say to take Phoebe's advice on this, because she is not only a fantastic editor, but she's also an amazing author as well. She's all over social media, so if you're looking for any tips, then I definitely follow her. But yeah, I'm totally in agreement that if we have an author with a good social media background, it's great, and it gives us that extra levers to pull, and in terms of publicity and marketing, it just makes it easier. But it's definitely not a deal breaker for me either. It's a bonus, but it's not essential.
Yeah. And I would say as well, it's something that I think it's better not to do it than do it really badly, if that makes sense. And just because it can, I think it's a good way of connecting with your readers. But if actually you're not going to enjoy that, or it's not going to come across in the right way, then it's probably better to just leave it and let your writing speak for itself. And the social media is never going to be more important than your book and the strength of your writing and your idea.
I think I'd also like to just flag as well that the different types of social media are slightly different as well. So if you're looking to connect primarily with the bloggers and people within the industry, then I would say Twitter is probably the best place to be doing that. If you want to be a bit more informal or connecting with customers, then Facebook is perhaps a better place. And Instagram is also great if you want to do video or just that more kind of exciting, fresh, new content. I think is great to be doing that on.
Yeah, definitely. And then next question, what ingredients make up a great crime novel? That is a hard question.
If we knew that, we'd have bestsellers all over the place, which we do, but Sophie, do you want to go first?
Well, the one that springs to mind is pacing. So something that will carry you all the way through to the end, ideally keep you hooked right until the last page. I think that's really important in crime books in particular. So yeah, I think that's a big one to start us off with, but there are lots of others. So
I think having a character that you can empathise with is important. I'm not someone who thinks you have to have really likeable characters, because often in crime fiction you'll have people that are actually quite dislikable doing quite terrible things, but as long as they are interesting and the reader can kind of understand why they're doing what they're doing, that works for me. So for example, if you have a serial killer that's obviously doing a lot of serial killing, then that doesn't mean you'll like them, but if there's a reason for their behavior, or you can kind of understand their backstory as to why they've become a killer, I think that makes for a stronger character.
Yeah, I totally agree with both of you that pacing and character are probably the two biggest things to look out for. And I find that often with submissions we see that people have spent a lot of time focusing on the beginning and making sure that's really hooky, and the ending sort of is always tends to be really good because it's where people are going. I think it's the middle that can start to feel a little bit soggy almost. So I think making sure that each scene itself is moving on a story in some sort of way and upping the stakes, and that's a really good way to make sure that readers are engaged throughout and never kind of lose interest at any point.
Yeah,
definitely.
I completely agree. And I also think sometimes the ending can fall off as well if you're not careful. Like I think it can sometimes feel a bit rushed at the end and almost like you don't get the full payoff that you were expecting, particularly if you do have a really, really good start. That can be even more disappointing if you get to the end and realise that it wasn't quite what you were hoping for.
Yeah, and on that note, I think it's important to tie up sort of loose ends or red herrings if there are any. In a lot of crime books, you might have a kind of sprinkling of red herrings, which is fine. I love a red herring, but you want to make sure that you've kind of covered everything off at the end, and that if something's left hanging, it's intentional and it's meant for the reader to think about later. You don't want to. Like I did read one recently where there was like a body that seemed to have been slightly forgotten about that wasn't really resolved in the end, and I was like, whose body was that? So I think it's just making sure you go back through and make sure you don't make any of those mistakes.
Well, and that's just us helping you out, because I think if it gets to a reader and a reader finds something like that, then I mean that's one of the things of writing crime fiction, is that your readers are actively looking for the clues in the book. So if your clues don't hold up, then you're creating problems for yourself down the line with your readers.
Yeah. I wonder if we should talk quickly about twists, because I know a lot of crime fiction is marketed as having a twist and people might wonder whether you actually need one. What do you both think about the twist?
I think twist is always slightly a difficult word to use, because I think it's been used so much by everyone for a couple of years that if you market it as having a massive twist, then everyone's looking out for it. And particularly if you're reading in this genre, then saying it's a surprising twist, everyone's so used to reading them that often they will guess it. So, I think it's more having those surprise moments, the shock moments, rather than an actual twist necessarily for me. Obviously it's kind of book dependent, but I think I'm always looking for something that's going to shock me, or something that's going to be, oh, I wasn't expecting that to happen. I think there are very few fans of crime who want to know exactly what's happened. Like it's always quite nice to have guessed little bits, but you want some things to be a surprise at the end. So yeah, I think twists are great in certain books, but I wouldn't necessarily say you have to have a twist to be able to make a crime book work.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, and I think only if it works in the story. Like if your story naturally needs a twist and you've got a really good idea, then it's definitely worth doing, but don't feel like you need to add one in just because every book is marketed as having a twist at the moment. I don't think you need to add one in unnecessarily. Cool. And then another question was, can you enter the competition if your book has been published before? I think our stance on this is that if you've self-published it before, then we're happy to see it. But if you've had that book published by another publisher, then we wouldn't be able to consider it. I think that was fairly straightforward. And then what trends are hot in crime fiction right now? Sophie, do you want to?
Cozy crime, which is very close to my heart. I know it's close to your heart as well, Catherine. So like cozy crime is having a renaissance with people like revival with people like Richard Osman. So I think it's that's a strong one at the moment, which I'm very happy about.
Yeah. What about you, Phoebe?
I think some trends are kind of continuing. So I think we're still seeing a lot of locked room mysteries. Our sister team published Lucy Foley, who published The Guest List and The Hunting Party, which were locked room mysteries where you have a kind of group of characters stranded in a specific location. And there's been quite a few of those recently. We did The Chalet, like we mentioned. There's been a couple of others. Kelly Taylor's next one, where you've maybe got a slightly unusual setting, and the kind of premise is that you've got a specific set group of characters, and maybe any one of them could have done the bad thing, whether that's a murder or kidnapping or whatever it is, and so the reader is kind of trying to guess who it might be. So I think that trend is kind of continuing from last year. I think I'm still seeing quite a lot of that in submissions. Anything else, Catherine, you think?
I think I've seen a lot more of the serial killer coming back, which is quite exciting. So there's one that I'm going to be publishing by Sam Holland next year, which is going to be a big serial killer thriller. And I think I can see that is coming back into fashion now, I suppose. So that's something to look at. And also I mentioned about escapism earlier on, that I think everyone in the series is so bored of seeing the same thing over and over in terms of their daily life, that they're looking for something new in fiction. So I'm seeing a lot of things that are set in different countries, or different communities that you might not know about, or just something completely outside of your own life. So yeah, anything that kind of gives you a way to escape for a few hours is good by me.
What do you both think about sort of the opposite of escapism? What do you think about more apocalypse or pandemic narratives and things like that? Are you interested or not? I know they're a bit Marmite at the moment with people.
Yeah, I mean, I personally don't really want to read anything about COVID because I find it just too unsettling and it feels too close to home. I wouldn't mind anything apocalyptic if it wasn't necessarily pandemic related. So I wouldn't mind anything a little bit dystopian, anything futuristic, as long as it had a really clear angle and it had that crime narrative. But for me, the pandemic's probably a bit of a no at the moment. You can ask me again in a year. Please God, let things be different in a year. What do you think, Catherine?
I think it's very hard to know, because at the moment when you're reading about something and it just, you know, particularly I've read a couple of apocalyptic things that have been great, but it's just like, oh my God, it's just so depressing at the moment. But, you know, when they come out in a year or two's time, hopefully we're going to be in a very different place. So I'm sort of trying to take myself out of those situations and judge it based on the actual book and the author itself rather than my personal feelings.
Yeah, I mean, that's a better approach than mine. But I think, and also, like, it's not to say that if your book is about COVID or lockdown, it won't work. You know, there have been really successful books over the last year or so where that has been a driving force and they have worked. So if that's what you've written, then don't let my comments put you off. But it is a really tricky one. And I think a lot of authors, actually, we should probably just talk about this, because I get a lot of my authors asking me when to set their books because of the pandemic, and whether they should set books in 2020, 21 and, you know, add our distancing and masks and that sort of thing, or whether they should just set them in the future or in a different year. What do you both think about that?
It's a really tricky one. I think, I mean, I've had the same, that lots of authors are asking that, and I've slightly tried to get around it by just saying, just don't mention a date. If it's a book that works without mentioning a specific date, then I think that's the simplest way of doing it, because COVID is so necessary. It changes day by day and week by week, that it's going to date very quickly. But having said that, the new Karen Storter, who I work on, she's done a brilliant job of setting it in, I think it's spring 2021. So she was basically trying to imagine where we would be when she was writing it all of last year, and it works brilliantly because it's kind of seamlessly done throughout. But I think it's a very tricky thing to do. I think she's done fantastically at it, but I'm not sure how doable that would be across everyone to do that the whole time. I don't know what you think about it.
I completely agree. I think it's such a hard thing. I mean, in daily life, it's hard to tell what's going to happen next. So I think it would be even harder to predict it in a book at the moment. Yeah, I think you'd have to keep it vague. Well, in my opinion, maybe I'd try and keep it vague enough, but I'm not sure how you'd do that. It would be an interesting challenge anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's best not to worry too much about it. Like, I wouldn't say it's something that, if you're thinking of submitting, like, don't get bogged down in the date and stuff, because we can kind of overlook that element. But if you do want to, I think, yeah, either maybe just ignore the date for now, or, I mean, I read one the other day which was set like a few years after this time, and it sort of referenced the COVID, you know, time backwards, and so you kind of knew it had happened, and I thought it was really well done, actually. So that's maybe an option. But to be honest, I also wouldn't really mind if you just completely ignored it and just acted like this year was normal, because I think the thing that's difficult is, you know, it's quite hard to have a crime novel set in a pandemic because no one's really doing anything and no one's interacting, so it doesn't make for a very exciting setting in that way. So yeah, it's tricky. I don't know, there isn't one proper answer. I don't think. It's whatever you feel most comfortable with, I suppose. Cool. Okay, we're probably just gonna have a little break there, and we will be back later to answer some more of your questions.